Chapter 17, Adventures in Mozambique. Memory fails me about the exact date, but it was somewhere in 1985, I think. I dropped off some Italian clients after a South African safari, but I just stopped outside the airport building. There was no way I was going to go inside the building as I looked terrible. It looked as if I had fallen with my face in a landmine. My face was just all crusted with scabs and blood, and my arms, my legs, you name it. What happened was 2 days before, an Italian client was was hunting eland, and he got shot. The thing, and the eland, of course, I've told the stories before. The eland, if it gets into that silly little trot of it, it can do so for days without stopping. So here we are, it's 2 days before the end of the safari. The client is worn out. He can't walk anymore because every time we see that eland, it's just too late for him to shoot, and the eland spooks. And so I said to him, okay, well, I think his hunting time is over. I have a responsibility to go and find that eland. He had his shot, and it's too bad. I have to go and find that eland and put it out of its misery. And I did. So the next day or two, I followed those eland tracks, myself and one of my trackers. And lo and behold, we saw it going up a hill and over the crest. And of course, the best I could do was to run after the eland going up the hill as best as I could. And lo and behold, the next moment I miscalculated. I either stepped into a hole or I stepped on a rock that I anticipated being a hole or vice versa. And I fell with my face first into some sandstone rocks. And any bloody green and brown thing that was a thorn was planted there or grew there. And of course, I thought my jaw was broken, but I did not say anything or couldn't say anything. And I managed to get up and, and see the eland going down the hill again. For a fraction of a second, I had a possibility of a shot, which I took, and luckily I brought her down. I had a two-way radio with me, so I contacted my one professional tracker, Zacharias, and told her, okay, get a tractor and some helpers with a trailer, and I told him where the eland was, more or less the location. As soon as I hear the tractor, I'll call him into the correct spot. Anyhow, there we were. We offloaded we loaded the eland, got it back to the camp, etc., etc., etc. And 2 days later, I was taking the clients back to the airport. Wasn't just I just said goodbye to the clients, and I ran into a guy that I knew from my university days, a guy with the name of Tinus van Niekerk, who also did some professional hunters work, PH work, as we said, and of course he knew of my professional hunting activities. And as it turned out, he was eagerly trying to get hold of me, which he could not do because I was out in the sticks, out in the boondoes, hunting. He wanted to talk to me about the fact that he felt Mozambique is ready to be entered as a hunting destination. And that we should, and whether I'd be interested in expanding our hunting operations into Mozambique. I wasn't sure about that. I said to her, "No, you got to give me a week or two to think about this, discuss it with my wife, etc., etc." It's not an easy decision to make. The company that he was talking about was a company that was yet to be formed. SA Wildlife Safaris, Southern Africa Wildlife Safaris. The directors to be Tinus and three other guys, Andre Kiewit, Donnie Kiewit, two brothers, and a South African with the name of Trevor Shaw, who was actually working as a greengrocer, if I can call it that. He operated a grocery store in Hong Kong. So if I joined them, I would be the other director. I said to her, okay, well, I've got to think about it. And I thought about it. Eventually, Tinus and I got together a couple of days later, maybe a week or so later. And I said, okay, well, this is what I need. I need X amount as a salary. My salaries that was payable to my staff need to be taken over by this company. All my obligations taken over. I had no vehicle payments to be made, but it was basically um, let me just see. Yeah, wages of trackers and skinners and staff. I was not too keen on operating in Mozambique. But the fact that our operations already extended, or my operations already extended to Zimbabwe and Zambia, I felt okay. Well, let's build a let's we can if we can extend the company, build the company to include Mozambique as well. That will be indeed an accomplishment. What we had to deal with, though, was that for all practical purposes, Mozambique was still involved in a civil war. I mean, after the Mozambique, no, after the Portuguese coup in Portugal, just about every white that lived in Mozambique and Maputo and Beira just got the heck out of the country because they knew there's going to be chaos and blood to flow. So they all, just about everybody left. Now, nothing of the kind materialized. And eventually, Frelimo got its independence in 1975. But for all practical purposes, Frelimo, which formed the Mozambican government, was still involved in a guerrilla war with a Renamo, a resistance movement, who was in fact resisting Frelimo because Renamo felt that they were not supporting the Frelimo idea of a one-party socialist state. But Renamo rather felt that it was a multi-party democracy that their supporters would like to see in place in Rhodesia. In Mozambique. Now, that idea was an idea that both Rhodesia and South Africa supported, and in fact used Renamo as a proxy to continue the war against Frelimo. And that was a terrible time. Over 1 million Mozambicans were killed in the fighting or starved due to interrupted food supplies. and another 5 million were displaced across the region, displaced across Mozambique. Everything, and I say everything in Mozambique was destroyed. There was no infrastructure. There was no schools. There was no hospitals. There was no nothing. You see a building there from afar. You get like closer and you say that was only the one facade of the building you saw. The other side of the building is gone. Broken down, bricks were taken for just to go and build another hut at another place. Things like that. The other thing that was very disturbing or worrisome was the fact that Mozambique was, in fact, just one large minefield. Frelimo never mapped the areas where they planted mines. And for you, as a nobody or a stranger, going into Mozambique and just wandering around, you're dead. You're not going to make it alive out of there because sooner or later you're going to be driving or walking over a landmine. Now, on the other hand, a lot of South African investors, after Frelimo or Mozambique got its independence, investors flooded into South Africa, either in the hopes of getting a hunting concession or any wildlife concession for wildlife tourism. The other thing was, of course, to see if they could convince the Mozambican government to go into contract with them to lease some of these islands for development of coastal tourism. Now, that was a great idea. That was a great idea because Mozambique had a stunning, or has a stunning coastal area. The whole of Mozambique in one border, 3,000 kilometers, is just stunning. I flew all of it, as I will later describe. As I say, word got around about all this, and soon myself, Tinus van Niekerk, Tim Otto of Tim Otto Safaris, and Anton Marais of Mkuzi Falls Safaris got together in Mozambique, and we laid the framework to bring about or establish a Mozambique Professional Hunters Association. Now, we as individuals with no contact in the government would not have gone anywhere. But Tinus had this friend, Jose Luis Cabasso, who used to be the Minister of Transport in Mozambique. So he could forward all the decisions that we made or took about establishing a Mozambican Professional Hunters Association. He could take the paperwork and the minutes of the meeting and hand it over to the appropriate whoever in the Mozambican government, and that helped a lot. The fact that we had Jose. Personally, I never knew how Jose was partnered with SA Wildlife Safaris or how he fit in the picture. But, every time I wanted to discuss with Tinus, it was just, it's a long story, we can talk about it later, that kind of thing. I just never got a clarity on that. So, not too long after that, Jose told Tinus that there was a possibility that we could get a hunting concession in Cabo Delgado province and in the north of Mozambique. Now, what is so nice about Cabo Delgado is right, this hunting area lay between the confluence of the Lugenda and the Rovuma River, and not far from the coast. It was a lovely place, really. What the other thing that made it attractive was in this particular area, right in the confluence between the Rovuma and the Lugenda, there was a village with the name of Negomano, and Negomano had a paved blacktop airstrip. Believe it, well, dating back all the way from when the Portuguese were still running the country, but the airstrip was still in great condition. Okay, that was one great thing in favor of the whole situation. Didn't take Tinus long to contact a friend of his, Andre Bester, who was a pilot friend of his, and the idea came about, to before we go and do anything or spend any money in developing this area, we got to do an air census, and counting the game and see how much game there was. Now, doing an aerial survey, I have never been a staunch supporter of doing an aerial survey with a fixed wing aircraft. You gotta have a helicopter in order to do that in a much more accurate way. Now, a lot of planning went into this adventure. I'm just going to read here. The first part, getting to Maputo to pick up Jose and another chap, Baldio Shand, was not a problem. Baldio worked for the Mozambique Department of Nature Conservation, and Andre, with the assistance of Jose, had to make sure that avgas, which is aviation fuel, was available in all areas we had to or wanted to refuel. So, Andre, being the pilot, he had to see where he thought we would need to refuel, and there had to be, at least a drum full, 44-gallon drum full of avgas delivered there and be available there. So communication was a nightmare, as everything had to be arranged in advance. And confirmation was needed, that everything was taken care of. Now, just remember that in those days, the phone system in Mozambique, it was down. It was basically non existent. But strange enough, the telex system, TLEX, the telex network, which was a customer to customer switched network of teleprinters similar to a telephone network, using telegraph grade connecting circuits for two-way text based messages. The telex was a major method of sending written messages electronically between businesses in the post World War II period. So there was no such thing as a fax yet. Fax didn't exist. Now, the area or the distance from Maputo, the capital of Mozambique, to Pemba, a town which is located in the upper northeast of Mozambique, entailed a flight of more than 3,000 kilometers. That gives you the idea of the length of the coastline of Mozambique. Okay, we cleared customs at Wonderboom Airport in South Africa, near Pretoria, and flew to Maputo, the capital of Mozambique, where Jose had arranged hotel accommodation for the three of us, myself, Tinus, and Andre, our pilot. As I say, he arranged a hotel accommodation for us. My good Lord, were we in for a rude awakening. The place where we were supposed to be accommodated was called the Hotel Escola, the hotel school. But man, was that a dump. The outer appearance looked acceptable, as did the lobby, but the elevator was not working, which should have been an indication of what was awaiting us. One has to bear in mind that back in 1989, even the capital city, Maputo, was basically a place that consisted of nothing but a collection of dilapidated buildings with a destroyed infrastructure, with most buildings being occupied by squatters. Okay, the lights in our room would work some of the time, on some of the days we were there. But there was no warm water. The window panes were broken. Either that or the windows wouldn't close. And the beds, well, I can only leave that to your imagination. That's what they call beds. Let me put it to you this way: the pillows were 24 inches by 24 inches by maybe 8 inches thick sponges. So that was your pillow, hard sponge. Of course, we were not warned to bring insect repellent. We were nearly eaten alive, or basically, we were eaten alive. If I remember correctly, we had to stay in Mozambique for 2 nights, so as to allow Andre and Jose to ensure all logistical arrangements were in place. Yeah, Maputo. But try to explain to any store in Maputo what and mosquito repellent was. They just weren't aware of what you were talking about. Now you have to remember we're now dealing of a situation, dealing in a situation where red tape was the order of the day. Everywhere you went, if you wanted to speak to somebody of authority in a certain position or whatever, you had to go and introduce yourself or make an appointment so that you can be interviewed that and that and that day. And it was just a bloody nightmare. So, make a long story short, we flew from Maputo to Beira, where we spent a night, refueled, and the following morning we continued onwards to a place called Nacala, where we again spent the night. Refueled, and the following morning flew onwards to Pemba, where a friend of Jose had a hotel on Pemba. The nicest thing about Pemba, we didn't stay in this hotel, but the nicest thing about Pemba is the first time in my life that I saw baobab trees growing on the beach. That was a sight that will always stay with me. In South Africa, you don't have, the coastal areas are just not, I wouldn't say prone, but conditions are not favorable for baobab trees. And here they were growing right on the beach in Pemba. We stayed in a little place not too far out of Pemba, a place called, a little village called Musimbwa da Praia, where Jose had arranged little chalets for us to stay, which was really nice. I mean, really nice meaning the windows worked, the windows had mosquito screens, the roofs, so the windows would open and close, and we had decent beds, looked like beds, and the pillows looked like pillows. And that was to be home for the next couple of days. Okay, finally, at long last, all the arrangements were in place, confirmed that all the places Andre would need to refuel had F-gas delivered or was available. I'm pretty sure. I don't know how it could be delivered because there aren't any damn roads. That's just the wonderful thing of Africa. You don't know. So the first thing is there we are on our way to the village of Negomano. As I mentioned, this is a place where the airstrip was still in a lovely condition. Now, the scene that enveloped was something that'll make it take their breath away. The minute we landed, kids came running towards the plane, and when the plane stopped, whatever, they approached the plane, and Baldio had to rush them away from the. We didn't want the kids to touch the plane, and because the kids came running out in hordes. And okay, so we got them to stay at a safe distance. A safe distance meaning at least 50 or 100 feet away from the planes. A couple of adults joined them. Baldio and Jose at first spoke with the adult folks, with myself and Andre not understanding a damn word what was going on. We finally concluded that yes, sure, they had to go and introduce themselves or us to the chief of the area. Okay, now they had to, luckily, what they call the chief's palace. The chief's palace was just a hut that was larger than the other huts. As I say, they had to do all the required introductions, etc., etc., etc. By that time, some Frelimo soldiers had also showed up. Baldio requested in Portuguese that one of the soldiers will remain with the plane, for safety's sake, and to make sure that the kids and whoever don't come and mess around with the plane at all. This is where a really funny story developed. As Baldio and them were away to the so-called chief's palace, it was in the days when it was just and me and the Frelimo soldier at the plane. Now, in those days, I still smoked. So I was smoking, and I could see this Frelimo guy. He was eyeing my cigarettes, and I thought, wait a minute, I would like to have a look at his gun. I'm familiar with an AK-47, but it's just a gesture of friendly banter. Hey, let me have a look at that rifle, But he did not understand it, so I offered him a cigarette, and he smiled from corner wraparound smile when I offered him a cigarette. But then I thought, wait a minute, man, this guy never sees a packet of cigarettes. So I went to the plane and brought a packet of cigarettes, and I gave it to him, suggesting that I would like to have a look at his rifle. And the guy had no problem. He handed me the rifle, And I decided, wait a minute, I'm familiar with this rifle. Let me just double check this thing. So I released the magazine, opened the breech, and I looked through that barrel. Now, it's a good thing that he never shot that rifle, because that thing would have exploded in his face. That barrel was so blocked and rusted and whatever. If he pulled the trigger with that thing, he would be dead. Okay, now I put the gun together again, put the magazine back, and handed him his gun. He wouldn't take it. And I thought, now what now? And by then, Baldio was coming back. And here I'm standing here with the Frelimo AK 47. And I told Baldio, I was just looking at his rifle, and he doesn't want it back. I don't know. Oh, and Baldio started laughing when he explained to me what was going on. Apparently, this guy thought I offered him a packet of cigarettes for this bloody AK 47. And now he felt I was reneging on the deal, because I wanted to give the rifle back to him. And he felt, no, a deal was a deal. He's not going to give me the cigarettes back. And I said to Baldio, we just laughed. Well, you have to do it respectfully in a sense. I just convinced the guy, no, I just wanted to look at the rifle. I'm not taking back the cigarettes, it's his. Of course, then you wrap around smile again, So he took the rifle and very happy. He scored a packet of cigarettes for doing nothing. Okay, at last they got back from the chief's palace, and we were ready to start with their game senses. Not that I knew much about what we set out to do, but the issue that I had a problem was that we did not have a plane which had wings above the fuselage, as that would allow adequate visibility for observers. And the situation with low wings, low wing plane is it obstructed to visibility. Now, the census technique entails flying a grid pattern over an area of the envisaged census, with wildlife counted on a 200-yard strip on either side of the plane and recorded accordingly. Any wildlife beyond the 200-yard limit is not counted. The flight path, or transect as they call it, is plotted on a map showing the beginning and ending points. Similar landmarks throughout the length of the transect are plotted and serve as checkpoints to aid in navigation and enable observers to isolate data from various segments of the transect. This may not make a lot of sense for a lot of people. But the sample area is calculated by multiplying the length of the transect, converted to yards or meters, by the width, 400 yards or 400 meters. The resulting area is then divided by 4840 square yards per acre, or 10,000 square meters per hectare. Results are tabulated as wildlife per acre or hectare to determine wildlife density. What I did not know was that surveys, what I did know is that surveys should be done early in the morning or late afternoon, not during the hot of the day or the heat of the day, or on windy days, because animals will be bedded down and will not be active. Other problems that faced us was the fact that we had to fly from Mocímboa de Praia to Negomano, a distance of about 200 kilometers each way, limiting our optimal census time, both mornings and afternoons. Now remember, after each morning flight, we had to return to Mocímboa de Praia over the heat of the day, fill up the plane there, wait for the afternoon optimal time, the best time to do counting again in the afternoon. I was fully aware that wildlife had been decimated throughout the Liberation War between Frelimo and the Portuguese. And the situation was worsened by poaching, indiscriminate poaching by villagers, and whatever was left was not much after that. I can assure you that. Yeah. Tinus and Andre, however, maintained that they were happy with what they saw, but had no answer to my question as to why they felt that it was not an issue not to have seen any buffalo and just a small number of elephants. If there are good numbers of buffalo, you must see them. I don't care if it's midday or when, you will see them because it's a large, black, dark animal. Okay. The following morning early, we took off heading south to Maputo, a distance of roughly 300 kilometers. And what was absolutely wonderful was to fly over the Maramayo Delta with these vast herds of buffalo. I mean, it looks like a black cloud on the ground. Maramayo Delta, I mean, apparently that area before the war had something like 50,000 buffalo. And guesstimates at that stage, after the war, had it down to 13,000. But it was still a fantastic sight to see this green delta covered in buffalo. Some buffalo even in the water, the seawater, I'm telling you. Where have you ever seen something like that? Now we went down to have a better view. You know, we wanted to see. And we were flying around and made some circles and whatever, just checking this and that. And Louis Cabasso was sweating profusely. And then all of a sudden insisting that we go up to our original height. Because it was, for him as a government employee, it was known to him that some airplanes were shot at by guerrillas. And at that low area where we're flying 100 feet above the ground, you're a serious target for somebody who wants to do harm. Anyhow, we flew back, continued to Maputo, and we got back to Maputo, or shall I rather say, we nearly did not get back to Maputo at 2 p.m. Because as we approached the airstrip on long finals, another plane, let me just say that, we were on our approach to land in Maputo when some idiot in another plane crossed our flight path at a 90-degree angle at exactly the same altitude we were flying, with us hitting him at that speed with no more than 150 feet. That was the scariest part of the whole Mozambican game count episode. All of us were extremely rattled. And Jose expressed that, yeah, we were very lucky, but it was obviously not our time. With the rest of us saying, yeah, that may be the case, but sure as hell wished it was the other guy's time. You know, flying at that height. Okay, so we did our census. Now, the following section, do you want to do that?